So Ray Tackett is our speaker. He's going to be talking about home invaders, and any questions that anyone has, we can address those at the end of the session. You can write them in the chat box, or you can unmute at the end of the class. So Ray, if you're good, then go ahead and begin.
Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate it. We have a short program this evening. Once again, if you have any questions, just put those in the chat box. Jessica will be monitoring that as we go. But a short program tonight about home invaders, more specifically fall home invaders, because we have different insect invaders that get inside of our homes at different points of the year. But the most common time for that to happen is now here in the central part of the state, or really all over the state of Kentucky. If you're someplace else, if you're farther north, for instance, like in Maryland, you would adjust the times that I talk about tonight for treating these home invaders. As far as external treatment, you would adjust that time 2 to 3 weeks back from Kentucky, because the farther north you go, the quicker it gets cold and the quicker the insects move on the inside. So just kind of keep that in mind. But why do insects migrate indoors? Well, there's several reasons that they would migrate indoors all during the year. They'll migrate, some pests will migrate indoors, but during wet periods or extremely dry periods. And sometimes they simply just get lost because it is not the best location for something like a stink bug to be inside. They would rather be sheltered in other places during the winter time, typically. So sometimes they just simply get lost. But this time of year, what triggers insects to move on the inside of a lot of homes is just simply the temperature change. And we'll talk a lot about that in this short presentation. But home invaders, there's a study in 1998, so it's a few years old, done by a couple of University of Kentucky specialists, entomology specialists, and it just showed that we have a big issue with people being very concerned about any kind of insect moving inside homes. In fact, over 90% of residents on this survey of 700 some respondents, 92% of those residents say that they have a great concern when any kind of pest shows up in their home, whether it be one cockroach, fleas, or a bunch of ladybugs, it doesn't matter. So it's a big concern when we're at home and all of a sudden we get friends visiting us in the form of insects because they don't necessarily need to be there. So let's start with some good news at the very front end of the presentation, because there's lots of news that's not so good in the presentation tonight, but let's talk about some good news first. Just some points I'll bring up. But entrance into homes is usually a short-term event. When pests get inside your home, they are generally harmless. They can't reproduce indoors, and they typically don't actively feed indoors, so they can't reproduce. They don't feed, and a lot of times their metabolism slows down, so they don't move around a whole lot, because specifically as we're talking about fall invaders, they're moving in and their metabolism's naturally shutting down for the winter, or slow. So they just don't move about as much. Now, some insects don't follow that pattern. Some are more active throughout the winter. Ladybugs would be one of those that stay somewhat more active in warm spaces in your home all throughout the winter. But typically they're pretty harmless. They're very annoying sometimes, but they're generally more harmless than not. But let's talk about a second here, fall invaders versus accidental invaders. And by accidental invaders, I mean the occasional wasp or the occasional random insect that gets inside of your home. We're not talking about those guys so much tonight. We can if you want to talk about those. But tonight we're talking about fall invaders, and by that we mean that they typically are reoccurring problems. They reoccur every fall around the same time, and that means that they have a predictable pattern, predictable dates that we can begin looking for them. So fall invaders are more consistent than just the random accidental invaders. Now, fall invaders are almost always adult insects. And I get the question, well, what do we do first when we get insects inside of our home? Well, my first questions to residents are, what do you have? And if they don't know exactly the insect that they have, I tell them that the first step is to identify the pest. That's the very first thing we need to do. And here in Kentucky, you can locate your local county extension office, and we can work with you in identifying the pest that you have if you don't know what that is. Because I always tell folks it's hard to treat if you don't know exactly the problem you have. Tonight, I thought that we would talk about the most common accidental invaders. Once again, these are most common fall accidental invaders. These are the ones that we typically see every fall here in Kentucky. We'll talk about the very most common ones that I see year in and year out. The first one that I get questions on every fall is the boxed elder bug. And this is the boxed elder bug over here to your right. That's this guy here. It's red and black, and it's kind of easily confused with another true bug that we'll talk about later in the presentation. But this is the boxed elder bug, and kind of look at the back. You'll see this V shape on its back. It's red and it's black, and it's not a real large insect. It's about as big as a lightning bug. But a boxed elder bug is a true bug. It's a scentless bug. It doesn't give off any kind of scent generally. It doesn't bite, even though some people report that they have been bitten and they have a reaction to a boxed elder bug. It's rare, but we do have reports that some folks have a reaction about like they would to a mosquito bite. About the worst a boxed elder bug can do is it can deposit fecal material in homes. And you have to be careful about squashing these things. If it's on a curtain or any kind of other material, they can leave an orange-brown stain that's a little tough to get off of fabrics. And if you have enough of them, they can create a kind of a disagreeable odor, and that goes for most of the fall invaders that we'll talk about tonight is the disagreeable odor. It's not one of the more stinky bugs, but it can leave an odor. Just kind of keep that in mind. If you look to the right here, sometimes we get calls of people in fairly good distress saying that, I mean, they're shocked. They see these red small, what that is nymph stage boxed elder bugs, but they see these in large groups on the side of boxed elder trees or maple trees. Both are hosts for the boxed elder bug, and they're very striking. It's a very bright red, and if you've never ran into those before, it can be pretty shocking. So we get calls at least a few times a year, people that run into these and really want to know what it is because they're kind of shocked. The problems with boxed elder bugs are more associated with areas having boxed elder trees. They feed with a kind of a piercing, sucking mouth part. They feed on different parts of the boxed elder tree. And that's sort of what they're associated with. The calls that I get the most in Bourbon County, to be honest, are calls from homeowners that live next to rivers or creeks, because that's where boxed elder trees grow. And that you tend to have more maple trees around those areas also. So that's where you're going to find boxed elder trees. That's where you're going to find boxed elder bugs in the greatest numbers. We get calls every year on the boxed elder bugs. A little bit more about boxed elder bugs. They move to structures in the fall, particularly stone structures. They seem to really like brick structures or any kind of heavy stone structures. They gather in groups and sun themselves on the warm side of homes. And this is a good time to treat them. And that's the southern or western side of homes. It's pretty typical for insects, especially fall invaders, to be sunning themselves on a cool fall day on the warm side of homes. But as far as prevention goes, you can, in theory, control them while they're on boxed elder trees. But I think that's very difficult, because if you live in an area that has one boxed elder tree, you probably live in an area that have lots of boxed elder trees, to be honest, if you live along streams. And these are flyers. They can fly for a distance. So as far as prevention goes, I've not heard of people having much luck controlling the boxed elder bugs on their own property, because they can come from other areas outside of your property. And the same goes for this long-term suggestion. I have a question mark here: remove trees. That's probably not really necessary, because if other people have boxed elder trees close to your property, that's going to provide a host for the boxed elder bugs. If you have a problem with those, you may remove your tree, but they'll just move over to your neighbor's trees. So it's really not helped the matter much if you remove your trees in most situations, unless you just have a single solitary tree or two and there's no others around, then you might want to consider that. But in most cases, that's not a really great consideration. As far as other control options go for boxed elder bugs, remember I did say that they do gather in groups on the outside of homes, on the warm side of your home, particularly light colored homes. That is not a bad time if you do choose to use an insecticide on those. That's a great time to really thin down the numbers that may possibly get in your home, is when they're clustered together. I do suggest, as with any insects that get in your home in large numbers, avoid killing them when they're in between your walls, in your wall voids. And the reason for that being is, if, let's say, you do a good job, you have a pest control company come treat your wall voids in between your 2x4 studs or whatnot in your home, and you kill a bunch of these, then you're going to have these decaying insects in large numbers decaying, and that's going to attract other feeders, particularly things like carpet beetles. That's going to attract them into your home, and they in turn can cause problems. So you have to watch about attracting these scavengers. But not only that, it creates a smell. So you have to be really careful if you have large numbers of these. You don't necessarily need to treat them while they're inside of your home, because in the spring they'll make their way out, and that's actually less of a problem than if you were to kill them inside your walls. The next guy we'll talk about here is the one that many of you guys know. I know Karen mentioned this one earlier right off the bat. It's one that people are having trouble with. Not quite yet in Kentucky, but farther north, you're probably already having trouble with these guys, is the brown marmorated stink bug. And we'll talk about how to positively ID this guy, because there are some lookalikes that look very similar to the brown marmorated stink bug, but they're harmless. And they can even be beneficial. We have different stink bugs here in Kentucky, but this is the one in particular that causes trouble. It is a major ag pest here in Kentucky and other parts of the country. The numbers do vary quite a bit year to year, but it is an ag pest. It's a major household invader here in Kentucky during the late fall. It's 4 to 6 weeks later, typically, than something like a ladybug, or the boxed elder bug that I just discussed. So it's just a little bit later. It is attracted to lights. So if you do have lights on the outside of your home, that may attract additional stink bugs of this type. Just keep that in mind. They typically, on the outside, they overwinter in dead trees. That's their natural habitat. That's where they usually in nature spend their time throughout the winter time. Something interesting is this last point here. They do prefer to enter higher parts of buildings. So we find these coming in openings in a home like chimneys or upper story windows. That's a unique habit to the brown marmorated stink bug. They come in around, once again, windows, soffits, especially chimneys. We see that being a big problem if you don't have your chimney capped, or you take the cap off your chimney early fall. They can, in great numbers, come in through chimneys. And attic vents, that's a really common spot, is to accumulate large numbers of these stink bugs. If you don't have proper vents on your attic, they move into your attic in great numbers. They can. This is just some pictures of damage. Here's damage year in and year out of stink bug damage on tomatoes. This is what it looks like on corn here, lower right. And if you grow fruit, this is peaches and apples and even green beans. The brown marmorated stink bug, as you can see, does a lot of damage to a lot of different ag and horticulture crops. That's why it's such concern to us. And here they are getting ready, looking for an opening in this corn here. That's Mr. Stink Bug. They're one of the ones that's a real culprit when it comes to agriculture damage, fruit and vegetable crops both. But as far as positively IDing the marmorated stink bug, is if you ever have an occasion to look very close at one, look at the antenna, and you'll see 2 white areas on the antenna, and that's a sure sign that you're probably looking at a marmorated stink bug. There's different stink bugs that have this black and white banding on the back of their shields. And basically what that is the wings do not cover the entire abdomen. So you're seeing part of the abdomen. That's what those stripes are. But with those two things, the black and white banding and the two stripes on the antenna, you can pretty much be assured that that's a marmorated stink bug, brown marmorated stink bug over some of the other lookalikes. This is a predatory stink bug, which is actually a beneficial, and you'll see that the antenna does not have the white banding. You'll see that there's some teeth along the exterior shell here. It does have the banding on the abdomen, but you lack the two white stripes on the antenna. So that is not a brown marmorated stink bug. That's one of the other stink bugs. Now here is a plain, simple brown stink bug, not a marmorated, but a brown stink bug. Once again, there's no white banding that's really visible on the antenna, and the hash marks here on the abdomen are not as pronounced. They are there, but they're not as pronounced. And once again, this is a brown stink bug. It is more brown on the shell here, the exoskeleton. They look very similar, but if you look close to those antennae, that'll usually tell you the difference there. A little bit about timing for here in Kentucky, the brown marmorated stink bug. The thing about this chart is it's just some information I pulled from 2006, 2007. These are captures. So what this chart tells me when I look at this with some other data is when they typically move in is here. Here in Kentucky, they move in late August, early September is when they move in. They move in a little later than some of the other insects. Some household issues associated. If you look to the right there, that's an entire bag of brown marmorated stink bugs. That's a lot of stink bugs because they come in great numbers usually, but we see higher numbers in eastern and central Kentucky, a little bit lower numbers in the western part of our state. They enter buildings over about a 2-month period, an 8-week period. Once again, high on structures. They are very flattened. They're a very flattened insect. They have a very flattened profile, which means that they can enter very thin cracks. And they love to just get in and hide above and behind objects in your home. I've already found several stink bugs inside my own home. I haven't had a big problem yet. I've been in my own home about 4 years. I've not had a big problem, but I do find the occasional stink bugs in there from time to time, and I remove those. But the good thing about the brown marmorated stink bugs is they do not reproduce. As I said before, they don't reproduce indoors. They have minimal feeding on plants. If you have house plants, they do not do a lot of feeding in the winter. They don't really bite. They don't transmit any known diseases that we know of. The bad things is they do stink. People report that they have a cilantro-like smell. I would describe it as a more stinky smell than that, but a lot of people do describe it as a cilantro-like smell, and they generally come in large numbers, greater than 25,000. If you have a problem, that's a lot of stink bugs. They produce a lot of excrement. Some people have reported that they have protein allergies to the stink bugs when they come in contact with them. And another unique thing about a stink bug is, like some of the other fall invaders, is they stay pretty active inside your home from midwinter on. So it's not unusual for you to find these things crawling around your home. They go to sleep for a short period of time, then they wake up and they don't go back to sleep. Breeding in the landscape, as I showed you from the pictures of stink bug damage earlier, they're on a lot of different trees. Crab apples, hollies, golden rain trees, tree of heaven, princess tree, mulberry. They're on a lot of different trees. So they have a lot of different hosts, and that's one of the reasons that accounts for their large numbers. Their movement into structures here in Kentucky begins early September, and it peaks late September to early October here in Kentucky. And it occurs the most on warm, sunny days, just like we're having now in Kentucky. They tend to gather on trees near structures, and they prefer windows, soffits, and just higher structures on buildings. AC units, anything that collects a lot of heat, they're really attracted to the heat, particularly high up on the house with heat sources. And if you have a light colored home, they're really attracted to those lighter colors. Some best management practices I've just listed here for the brown marmorated stink bug And anything that you read on this list goes for any other insect I'll mention tonight during the presentation. Is just go down the list here, and it's just general pest control strategies, caulking windows, weather strips. Another thing that we don't think a lot about is raking away all debris and vegetation from your home's foundation. You need to inspect for and seal any kind of foundation cracks, because they can really get into those. Remember, this type of stink bug is very thin. It can get into small openings. Review your crawl space entries. And this is a big one. Seal around any exposed plumbing pipes. That's a common point of entry for the stink bug. Cap or screen the top of chimneys. This may be the most important thing on the list. If you have a chimney in your home, it's really important that you put a good fine mesh screen on there. And we'll talk about screen mesh here in just a second. Put a fine mesh screen on your chimney to keep these things out. If you do contact a pest control professional, have them treat surrounding vegetation, because remember, this type of stink bug collects on trees around your home before it enters your home typically. So it's sometimes, if you're having a really, really big problem, you can have a pest control firm. If you know that there's a lot of stink bugs on a particular tree or shrub, you can have those treated and deal with some of the issue there before they enter your home. If they get inside, this goes for any pests that this last point here, this goes for any pest tonight. Once they get inside, you do not have very many pesticide options that I typically recommend for homeowners. Generally, that's when a vacuum becomes your best friend, is just vacuuming these guys up if you have a pretty good sized problem with those. Here in the lower right, you'll just see a small, what we consider a small window crack. To a stink bug, that just looks like a welcome sign. A stink bug can get in these tiny cracks with no problem whatsoever. Let's talk a little bit about if you decide to use some screening, you can get screened in different mesh sizes. There was this lab evaluation study done, and they looked at different stages of development for stink bugs and different mesh screen sizes and how effective they were in stopping the movement of stink bugs. And here are the results of that test. Look at the stink bugs at the bottom. Here's the stages of development for a stink bug, and they go from small and they get larger, and there's a male and female on the right. But on this third instar stage, this little stink bug all the way to the left, that's just an immature stink bug, third instar. They're tiny. Now, even if you're using tiny mesh screen of 1/8 of an inch, it's only effective in stopping around 60% of those stink bugs. Now, you'll notice on the chart up here, as the stink bugs get bigger, the mesh gets more effective in stopping those stink bugs movement. As the insect gets bigger, the finer meshes do a better job. And the only thing I wanted to point out on this whole chart is that you need to, if you're going to screen for this stink bug, you need to use fine mesh. It just works so much better. If I had my choices, I would use the finer meshes, even though I know I'm not going to stop all the stink bugs. Remember, it's adults that are trying to get inside of homes. So if you can use a fine mesh, you can do a pretty good job of screening those out if it's something like a chimney or something like that. So use fine mesh. Timing, if you're going to spray insecticides, generally it's around it's 2 to 3 weeks after the lady beetle, and we base it on those timings. And the lady beetle is generally around the 1st of September. There's several classes of chemicals that do a pretty good job, but there's a classification of chemicals that we usually recommend on the exterior only. Remember, you have insecticide options when they're on the outside, but pyrethroids. And if you have questions about that classification of chemical, you can call your local extension office, and we'll give you more information on different over-the-counter chemicals that fall into that group of chemical class. Some help is here, not here in Kentucky, but it's in other states, and I forget exactly which states. But there is a predatory wasp that exists in Asia that keeps this type of stink bug, the populations in check, and that's the samurai wasp. and it kills up to 70% or more of the brown marmorated stink bug eggs in Asia. And it's in 11 states here in the US, but it's not in Kentucky. Someday it may make its way here, but that's the samurai wasp. When we get that, it really reduces any kind of issues that we have with the brown marmorated stink bug. So that's one of those guys, and it was an accidental import in the United States. Probably got here the same way the stink bug got here, the brown marmorated stink bug. But that's a naturally occurring predator that could help us in the future. If you're one of those states that this predator is in, it really helps with populations, bringing down those populations of stink bugs. Other tactics to control stink bugs in the home is vacuuming is my very favorite, but let's talk about that for just a second. I have both types of vacuum. I have a bag vacuum at home, and I have a bagless vacuum at home. And I have learned not to use my bag vacuum in picking up things like ladybugs or stink bugs. Why do you think that would be? The reason being for me is if I've got a new bag in my bag vac and I use it to pick up stink bugs, every time I go to use that vacuum cleaner again, it is going to put out stinky air into the house because it's blowing through those stink bugs. So what I have to do with the bag vac is empty it or put a new bag in every single time I use it to pick up stink bugs. So I do not use a bag vac to pick up ladybugs or stink bugs or anything like that anymore. I only use my bagless vac, and I can wash it out much easier, and I don't waste bags by having to throw a brand new bag away that I may have picked up a few stink bugs in. So kind of keep that in mind. I learned that the hard way. There are light traps that can help if you have a moderate population of stink bugs in your home. And all that is making a light trap is literally a light, like in the center picture down here. That's just a pan of water with a little bit of dish liquid. Put a few drops of dish liquid in a pan of water, mix it up and put a light source on that. Now, stink bugs are really, really drawn to light sources. You turn off most of the other lights in an area where you have a stink bug problem. And the next morning you get up and you come in and you have a lot of stink bugs that have died in that soapy water, and it can work pretty well. I've heard pretty good reports of people trying that, and they've really reduced the problems they have inside their homes with that. And you can do the same kind of a light trap with a 2-liter bottle that you convert, cut off, and I can provide plans for this. But you kind of flip the top, you cut the top off, flip it upside down, and you put a pumpkin light in there, or what I call a jack-o'-lantern light. It's a light source, and then the stink bugs enter the top of the funnel, and then they can't get out. And that works pretty well, but I think it's a little bit easier to just use the light and pan method. And there are pheromone traps that you can also get, like the one on the left here. I don't use those as much because I'm always afraid of drawing in more stink bugs into the area and creating a bigger problem with those pheromone traps. Let's talk a little bit about the multicolored Asian lady beetle. And the focus here is on multicolored because these come in a number of different colors and a number of different patterns. And we'll talk about how to positively identify this type of lady beetle because there are different types. But this is what we call an invasive beneficial insect. They do feed on things like aphids that cause damage to, landscapes and agriculture crops. The lady beetle doesn't, but they feed on insects that do cause damage like aphids. So we consider the I bet you don't consider it a beneficial. It becomes a nuisance for you. But the USDA tried for years to establish this insect in the United States and were unsuccessful, but then Mother Nature took off, and at some point a natural population just developed years ago that was first ID'd by an amateur entomologist in southern Louisiana, identified that we had a population of these Asian lady beetles. So they are beneficial, but in great numbers, they can get inside your home and cause some problems like any other fall invader. But identifying Asian lady beetles, it's important to know that it's generally larger than some of the other lady beetles. It can be seen in a range of colors, and I'll show some pictures of that, ranging from orange to yellow to red, and even I've seen almost all black lady beetles. Really interesting. But this beetle typically has around 19 black spots, but not always. So I'll use that sort of as an ID method, but I don't rely on that exclusively, because sometimes, even though it's a Asian lady beetle, it doesn't always have to have 19 spots, but it usually does. And I'll show you some pictures of looking for the clear black M-shaped marking behind its head. That is a better way of identifying this type of lady beetle. And that M can look thick or thin or broken in appearance, just like this. You'll see an M here. You see that? That's pretty common. But here is a broken M, but it's still a lady beetle. And you'll notice here that this, I didn't count the spots. I'm not for sure if it's 19, it may be, I'm not for sure. But this lady beetle also has the same, it has spots on there, but they're almost invisible. You'll see spots on the shell. If you look really close, all over the shell, they'll look close. So these two at first glance don't look all that similar, but when you really start to look at them, they are both Asian lady beetles. We get questions from time to time on the nymph stage of lady beetles. This is the beneficial stage of a lady beetle. And these are aphids here that this lady beetle larva is feeding on. They help out a lot in controlling undesirable pests like aphids. They do a good job for us. But we get calls every year of people saying, what in the world is this thing here? And it turns out just to be a lady beetle larva. They move to structures mid-October. They actually move in here the last several years. They actually move in later than the brown marmorated stink bug. They tend to prefer light-colored homes, just like the brown marmorated stink bug. They're drawn to light-colored homes because they warm up faster, particularly light-colored homes with a south or southwestern exposure. When I was in the eastern part of the state, that was about 80% wooded. In the eastern foothills of Kentucky, we had a lot more issues with lady beetles because it was pretty common to have homes with a lot of woodland around them, and that's where the lady beetles are located. And they're very adept at finding very small cracks to enter homes. So the least little crack they can find and get into your home and cause issues. In the upper Midwest, a couple more facts about lady beetles. In the upper Midwest, you tend to have a 2-year population cycle, and then you have kind of a low-high cycle, a big year and then a little year. But here in Kentucky, for whatever reason, we don't see that extreme variation from year to year. Now, we do have some years that are really bad and some years not very many problems at all. But out west, for whatever reason, they tend to have a regular cycle where we do not in Kentucky. They don't really bite. They will stain fabric if crushed, and they do give off a smell, lady beetles do. They are active on warmer days indoors. Even in late winter, they stay active, much like the brown marmorated stink bug does. Fall invaders, just a little bit of review. Generally, fall invaders don't bite or sting, especially the ones that we just talked about. They don't lay eggs indoor. They're not breeding. They're not feeding. They exit the structures generally in springtime. A lot of fall invaders, they do overwinter in clusters, but once again, I caution you about putting any insecticide in wall voids and cavities, because the last thing you want to do is kill them in mass and just having them sit there and begin to rot and decay, because that'll create a bigger problem than you're solving, I think. They become active on warmer days. And once inside, you just vacuum. If you see the occasional one on the inside, or even if you see a lot of something like a stink bug, is just vacuum. That is the easiest, kind of lowest impact method of dispatching with those. Your real control options exist when they're on the outside of your home. Once again, on the inside of your home, your choices are very limited on control. Here in Kentucky, I don't know about other parts of the state or other states outside of Kentucky. It's an insect that I occasionally get questions on. That's the Western Conifer seed bug. I don't have as many questions here in this part of the state in central Kentucky, particularly in my county, Bourbon County, which is just north of Lexington. I don't have as many questions because these bugs are associated with evergreens, pine trees, so on and so forth. We just don't have that many around, but some of you guys may occasionally see these. And you'll see this kind of flattened structure on the back of their legs. It's a larger insect. They are noisy flyers. They make a noise when they fly. They do not bite and they do not sting, but they stay active all year round in the wintertime on warm days inside your home. They are a bigger insect, so you can kind of keep these out of your home a little bit easier than you would something like a brown marmorated stink bug. Millipedes, I threw this in, even though it's technically not a fall invader, it's a summer invader, but we get so many questions on this, I wanted to include this. They are actually not true insects, but they're arthropods. They live in moist areas, so when it gets really dry out, sometimes you'll see them moving from the outside to the inside of your home, especially if you have issues with water on the inside of your home. Interesting thing about millipedes is they can shoot a little bit of a defensive chemical that creates a stain and irritation if you aggravate them. They do have a defense mechanism. Most of those do. But generally they breed in flower beds, mulch, and in the woods. So if you have those areas around your home, you probably do have some millipedes around that you may occasionally have to deal with if you have flower beds around your home or you live near the woods. You'll probably occasionally see those. Several factors, once again, drive them into structures. If it's hot outside or dry weather outside, or if it gets really wet outside, all of those are reasons that move millipedes on the inside. They typically enter through gaps in the foundation, under doors, crawl spaces. They're larger arthropods, so they can't get into tiny cracks, but they can find ways inside your home if you have some issues in foundations and things. Millipede management, just some tips here. Keep mulch here, keep mulch, fallen leaves, grass clippings away from your structure. It's best if you have about 1.5 foot bare zone next to the foundation of your home, because they won't cross that usually. But if you're like me, most of us, we put mulch all the way up against the foundation of our homes, and that provides them a nice transition to get into your home. If you have mulch all the way up against your home, they will find their way in sometimes. You can reduce the depth of your mulch so it doesn't stay so moist to about 2 to 3 inches, and that does help. And remove any kind of structures where they can hide at during the day around home. That's things like leaf piles, leaf debris, accumulated leaves and mulch beds, things like that. And just anything you can do to direct water away from your home really helps with controlling the population of millipedes. If you have an area that stays damp around your home, you're probably going to have millipedes around your house. And that includes trimming bushes to let a little bit of sunlight in. Once again, you're just trying to dry it out around your home. Another bug that I have, maybe, I don't know, Jessica, maybe she'll chime in at the end of the meeting here, but I only get 2 to 3 questions on this particular insect a year, and that's the eastern blood-sucking cone nose bug. It's also called the kissing bug, and it's been in the news a lot the last 3 to 5 years. So we get more questions on it. It's a nocturnal blood feeder. We usually don't see it during the day. Last year, I think I had 2 calls on this guy. There was an instance where a resident had been bitten by it and just had an allergic reaction. And it was about like a mosquito, and she found some blood on a sheet. It did indeed feed on her. She had a bit of a reaction, but was fine after that. But the cone nose bug is a species of assassin bug. Now, you may think that they look a little bit like the red and black boxed elder bug, but a boxed elder bug's about the size of a lightning bug. These guys are 2 to 3 times bigger than that. They're a larger insect. And if you remember on the boxed elder bug, it had kind of the red markings here on the boxed elder bug on the wings. These don't have that. There's the difference. They also have this piercing, sucking mouth part that they fold up underneath them. That mouth part is folded up underneath when they're just moving about. And that is also something that's unique to this cone nose bug over a boxed elder bug. They're about a 1-inch insect. They're much larger than the box-tailed bug. They have a flattened body, wide abdomen. They are red and black. That's why they're sometimes confused with other insects. Once again, this is just a picture of a box-tailed bug, and there is the differentiator there. It's smaller and it has those red markings on the back, and I think that's a great way to tell the difference. They got their name kissing bug because they do tend to feed around the lips and around the face, and sometimes people can have a reaction to that. A swelling around the eye is a pretty common symptom. You'll see here, this image is from the CDC, that you can have a swelling around the eye from a kissing bug. In other parts of the world, there's an inflammatory disease that can be caused by this kissing bug. It can be a carrier. We typically don't see that in the United States, and that's Chagas disease, which has many hosts. It's a lifelong infection. It's transmitted actually by several species of kissing bugs, but not the one that we have here in Kentucky. It's mainly an issue in the tropical Americas, like Mexico on down south, but not here in the United States. There's many reasons for that. The Chagas pathogen that we're so worried about is carried in bug feces, and people often rub the feeding side after getting bitten. And if you have one of the kissing bugs that are down in the lower Americas, you'll rub that pathogen potentially into a wound, and then you get Chagas disease, and it can be an issue. Doesn't happen here for the most part. It's very rare here in our part of the United States, and there's some very specific reasons for that. And here's some of the reasons that Chagas is really not transmitted, or we don't have a case in Kentucky. We don't have a reported case in history of Chagas being reported in Kentucky. But the feeding habits are such for our cone-nose kissing bug that we have here is that they don't defecate while they're feeding, so they never spread the pathogen. You never rub that pathogen on the feeding side into a wound. And that's a key differentiator of our particular kissing bug that we have, the cone-nose bug we have. It doesn't defecate while feeding, and we're very lucky for that because you don't have the pathogen introduced. Now, the eastern cone-nose that we do have can test positive for the pathogen, but that does not mean that it is a good vector for that pathogen for the reasons that I just mentioned above here. That's why we don't see any cases so far. We don't see any cases of Chagas here in the state. Once again, there's never been any confirmed cases here in Kentucky. We're very fortunate. Fall invaders summary is prevention is everything. Timing is everything. If you're trying to treat for the brown marmorated stink bug, you need to look at early September. If you're farther north, it was probably 2 to 3 weeks ago you start seeing issues. The multicolored Asian lady beetle that we so commonly see all over the US, that's mid-October. In Kentucky, we're not seeing it yet, but we're going to see it a little bit later on this year. And just remember that the best treatments, if you're using some kind of product on the outside of your home, they fail if you apply them too late. They fail if you apply them too late. A real quick note on a couple of management strategies for these fall invaders is that it's the best practice to keep the invaders from getting indoors, and that means pest proofing your home. If you can't pest proof, on the second point there, if you can't pest proof your entire home, focus on the sunny sides of your home, particularly where the sun hits earliest in the morning. That's usually your south or west facing walls. If you can't do the entire structure, at least kind of pay close attention to those sides of your home. If you have pests that tend to gather in large groups on the outside of your home or structure, that's a good time to spray direct sprays of something, a low impact substance like insecticidal soap. And you can get some organic formulations of insecticidal soaps. So it's a good low impact option, or you can use one of the inorganics, the synthetic insecticides, to take care of some of those problems. It probably won't completely eliminate the problem, but it'll certainly help. And pay careful attention to pesticide labels, as they really give you good instructions on how far from your home, how high up on your home for an external barrier treatment. This point here is very important if you use an insecticide. We'll say something to this effect. They'll say treat 2 to 3 feet out from your home up to even 6 feet on some of these products out from your home on the ground. And some of them will even say treat 2 to 3 feet up on the foundation of your home. If the label allows that, then use the product like the label says. You treat out from your home on the ground, then treat up on the side of your wall of your home to use that product properly. That's really important. We have a lot of people using those in an inconsistent manner, and they get inconsistent results, to be honest. Once pests come indoors, once again, your control options are limited. We generally don't recommend bug bombs for a lot of different reasons. They can be dangerous if used improperly. And under best case scenarios, they're minimally effective. They get rid of some of the exposed insects that are out of the wall cavities at the time. But if you have large numbers of insects within your wall cavities, they don't control those. They just come out later. You have the problem over and over again. Once again, vacuuming may be your best option in most cases. And again, be mindful of bag versus bagless vacs. You don't want to be wasteful. And if you use a bagged vac, you may be changing that bag every time you pick up some of these insects, and you don't want to do that because, it runs it a lot of money. And there's other options, things like baits and glue traps and things we haven't talked about tonight. But at this point, I'll entertain any kind of questions you guys have. I'm going to stop here. I know we didn't cover all the insects, but I wanted to cover the top 2 or 3. We didn't cover things like flies and spiders and all of those, but we can talk about those if you have some questions at this time. I kind of went through it really fast. This is one of my presentations that's part of 2 to 3 other presentations, but I kind of put it all together to try to cover the ground tonight in a general sort of way. So, Jessica, any questions?
Thank you, Ray. No, we don't have any questions in the chat box, but if anyone wants to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask that, and we can try to answer it for you.
Okay,
Go ahead.
And although I'm in Maryland, the things are really very much the same. And even though you didn't cover it, this year we've had an uncanny amount of spiders. Is there any reason? Is it the change in weather or what? Any thoughts on that?
On any kind of system, when we have an increase in a population of things like spiders, I try to backtrace that because I ask myself why there are more spiders. And it's usually a couple different reasons. Number one, the weather's good for them to increase in population. And number 2 is the things that they're feeding on. They've had lots of food. And if they have lots of food, they have lots of babies if the weather works for them. So have you noticed any other increase in insects, either in your landscape or gardens? Because spiders feed on a lot of other insects, and that usually one relates to the other, if that makes sense.
The only other one we've really had an increase in is ants. The ants this year have been unrelenting outside. Now, we don't really have a problem in our house, but it's just the spiders are everywhere. And I'd never seen them like this before, but it could be an anomaly. I don't know. I don't know, but I thought I'd just ask in case you had an idea.
Spiders, once again, I usually, if it's been a year where there's been a particularly large number of their prey that they feed on outside, I see increases in spiders. But other than that, it's sort of a little bit mysterious in that there's several factors that can contribute to that. And it's usually kind of random outside of weather and what they feed on.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay. Well, thank you all for, if there's no other questions, thank you for attending tonight, and we appreciate it.